Hello everyone. Before starting the stories, I would like to ask you to like and subscribe to the channel. And also, write down how much time you have now and from which country you are watching this video. It is very interesting where this video has reached. Enjoy watching. Sheriff David Brame had been patrolling the back roads of Pierce County, Washington for over 15 years. He knew every curve, every abandoned farmhouse, every stretch of woods that lined the rural highways. But on the night of April 26, 2003, something felt different. The darkness seemed heavier, more oppressive than usual. It started with a routine call around 11:30 p.m. A concerned citizen reported seeing what appeared to be a body lying in a ditch along a desolate stretch of Highway 302. The caller's voice was shaky, uncertain. They weren't even sure if it was human or just debris, but something about the shape had made them pull over and dial 911. Sheriff Brame radioed dispatch that he was responding. His voice was calm, professional as always. He'd handled countless calls like this over the years. Most turned out to be garbage bags, discarded mannequins, or fallen tree branches that played tricks on the eyes in the darkness. But protocol demanded investigation, and Brame was nothing if not thorough. The stretch of Highway 302 where the caller reported the sighting was particularly isolated. Dense forest pressed in on both sides of the narrow road, creating a tunnel of darkness that even the sheriff's powerful headlights couldn't fully penetrate. The nearest house was miles away. Cell phone reception was spotty at best. It was the kind of place where bad things could happen, and no one would know for hours. Brame's patrol car crawled along the roadside, his spotlight sweeping across the ditches and tree line. The beam caught glimpses of reflective eyes, raccoons, deer, other nocturnal creatures watching from the shadows. But no sign of what the caller had reported. He'd been searching for nearly 20 minutes when his radio crackled to life. "Sheriff, we've got another call coming in. Same area, different caller. This one says they saw someone walking along the highway, acting erratically, possibly injured or under the influence." Brame acknowledged the call and continued his patrol. The second report made him more cautious. 2 separate calls about the same isolated stretch of road within an hour wasn't coincidence. Someone was out there and they needed help. That's when he saw the figure. At first, it was just a shadow moving between the trees, about 50 yards ahead. Brame slowed his vehicle and activated his emergency lights, bathing the area in alternating red and blue. The figure stopped moving and seemed to turn toward the patrol car. In the intermittent light, Brame could make out what appeared to be a person in dark clothing, standing perfectly still. He grabbed his radio. "Dispatch, I've got eyes on a subject. Highway 302, mile marker 15. Individual appears to be in the woods adjacent to the roadway." "Copy that, Sheriff. Do you need backup?" Brame hesitated. Something about the figure's posture, the way it stood motionless in the strobing light, made his instincts scream. But he was a sheriff with 15 years of experience. He'd handled everything from domestic disputes to armed robberies. One person standing in the woods shouldn't rattle him. "Negative on backup. I'm going to make contact." He stepped out of his patrol car, keeping the vehicle between himself and the figure. The night air was cold and still, carrying the scent of pine and something else, something organic and unpleasant that he couldn't quite identify. "Sheriff's Department," he called out, his voice echoing through the trees. "I need you to step out where I can see you." The figure didn't move, didn't respond. It simply stood there, a dark silhouette against the darker forest. Brame drew his flashlight and swept the beam across the area. The powerful LED light revealed more details that made his blood run cold. The figure was definitely human, but something was wrong. Their clothes appeared to be torn and dirty, hanging in tatters. Their posture was unnaturally rigid, like a scarecrow propped up in a field. "Sir, I'm going to need you to respond to my commands." Brame's voice was louder now, more authoritative. "Step forward with your hands visible." Still nothing. The figure remained motionless. Brame began moving closer, his hand resting on his service weapon. Years of training kicked in. Maintain distance, control the situation, be ready for anything. But as he approached, the smell he'd noticed earlier became stronger. It was the smell of decay, of something that had been dead for far too long. When he was within 20 feet, the figure finally moved, but it didn't step forward or raise its hands. Instead, it slowly turned its head toward the sheriff. The movement was mechanical, unnatural, like a puppet being manipulated by unseen strings. Brame's flashlight beam caught the figure's face, and what he saw made him stumble backward. The face was partially decomposed, skin hanging in strips, eye sockets dark and empty. But the most terrifying part wasn't what he saw. It was what happened next. The thing that had once been human opened its mouth and spoke in a voice that sounded like gravel being ground together. "Help me." Every instinct screamed at Brame to run, to get back in his car and call for backup. But his training, his duty, his years of service kept him rooted to the spot. Someone needed help, and he was sworn to protect and serve. "What's your name?" he managed to ask, his voice barely steady. "What happened to you?" The figure's head tilted to one side, the movement accompanied by a wet, cracking sound. "I've been waiting," it said, "waiting so long." That's when Brame noticed the others. Movement in his peripheral vision made him sweep his flashlight beam in a wide arc. More figures were emerging from the trees, all in various states of decomposition, all moving with that same unnatural, jerky gait. Some were missing limbs. Others had faces that were barely recognizable as human. Brame's radio crackled. "Sheriff, what's your status? We haven't heard from you in several minutes." He reached for his radio with shaking hands, never taking his eyes off the growing crowd of figures surrounding him. "Dispatch, I need immediate backup. Multiple subjects. Possible medical emergency." He couldn't bring himself to say what he was really seeing. Who would believe him? The original figure had moved closer while he was distracted. Now it was only a few feet away, close enough that Brame could see the writhing mass of insects that had made their home in its rotting flesh. "You're the sheriff," it said, its voice becoming clearer, more human. "You're supposed to help people." I want to help you," Brame replied, his voice cracking. "But I need you to tell me what's happening here." The figure smiled, revealing teeth that were brown and broken. "We're the ones who got lost, the ones who never made it home. We've been waiting for someone to find us." More figures pressed in from all sides. Brame could hear the wet sound of their footsteps in the soggy ground, the whisper of fabric against bark as they moved through the trees. The smell of decay was overwhelming now, making his eyes water and his stomach heave. "How many of you are there?" he asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. The figure's smile widened. "All of us. Everyone who disappeared on this road. We're all here, Sheriff. We're all waiting." Brame's backup arrived 40 minutes later to find his patrol car empty, engine still running, driver's door open. His radio, weapon, and flashlight were scattered on the ground. There were no signs of struggle, no blood, no evidence of what had happened. The search that followed was the largest in Pierce County history. Hundreds of volunteers, K-9 units, helicopters, and thermal imaging equipment scoured the area for days. They found nothing, but the calls kept coming in. Motorists reported seeing a figure in a sheriff's uniform walking along Highway 302. always in the same area where Brame had disappeared. The figure would wave down cars, approach the driver's window, and ask in a voice that sounded like David Brame's, "Have you seen my patrol car?" Those who stopped to help reported that the figure's face was partially obscured by shadow, but they could see enough to know that something was terribly wrong. The skin was pale and waxy, the eyes were sunken and dark, and there was always that smell, the smell of something that had been dead for far too long. The highway patrol eventually placed permanent barriers along that stretch of road, citing safety concerns. But locals know the real reason. They know that some disappearances can't be explained, and some mysteries are better left unsolved. Sheriff David Brame was never found. But on certain nights, when the fog rolls in thick and the darkness seems to press in from all sides, people still report seeing his patrol car's lights flashing in the distance, still searching for something that can never be found. Sheriff Tom Heggie had worked the graveyard shift in rural Montana for 12 years, and he thought he'd seen everything the darkness could throw at him. Drunk drivers on back roads, domestic disputes that turned violent, the occasional meth lab hidden in abandoned barns. But nothing had prepared him for what would happen during his final patrol on October 13, 2009. The call came in at 2:47 a.m. through the emergency dispatch system. A frantic woman's voice, barely audible through heavy static. "There's someone in my house. Please help me. 1247 Crow Creek Road. He's trying to get into my bedroom." Dispatcher Sarah Coleman tried to get more information, but the line went dead. She immediately radioed Sheriff Heggie, who was patrolling about 15 miles from the location. "Sheriff, we've got a possible home invasion at 1247 Crow Creek Road. Female caller reports an intruder trying to access her bedroom. Line went dead. ETA?" Heggie's voice came back clear and professional. "Copy that. I'm en route. ETA 12 minutes. What Sarah didn't know was that 1247 Crow Creek Road had been abandoned for over 3 years. The house had belonged to Margaret Winters, an elderly widow who had died in 2006. Her family had tried to sell the property, but the remote location and the house's deteriorating condition made it impossible to find buyers. It had been sitting empty ever since. Sheriff Heggie knew the area well. Crow Creek Road was a narrow, winding dirt path that led deep into the foothills, passing only a handful of scattered properties. Most were hunting cabins or old homesteads that sat empty for months at a time. It was the kind of place where people went to disappear, either by choice or by force. As he drove through the darkness, his headlights cutting through the thick Montana night, Heggie radioed dispatch for more information about the property. "Sarah, can you run 1247 Crow Creek Road through the system? Get me property records, any recent activity." There was a pause before Sarah's voice came back, and Heggie could hear the confusion in her tone. "Tom, that's strange. The system shows that property is vacant. Has been since 2006. No utilities, no active phone service." Heggie felt a chill run down his spine. If there was no active phone service, how had the call come through? But protocol was protocol, and someone had called for help. He had to investigate. "Copy that. I'm still responding. Could be squatters or someone using a cell phone." The road to the Winters property was worse than Heggie remembered. His patrol car bounced and lurched over deep ruts and fallen branches. The forest pressed in on both sides, creating a tunnel of darkness that seemed to swallow his headlight beams. The only sounds were the crunch of gravel under his tires and the distant hoot of an owl. When he finally reached 1247 Crow Creek Road, what he saw made him stop the car and stare. The house was completely dark, but that wasn't what bothered him. It was the condition of the building. The windows were boarded up, the front porch was partially collapsed, and thick vines had grown over most of the structure. This wasn't a house where anyone could be living. Heggie grabbed his radio. "Dispatch, I'm at the location. Property appears to be abandoned and secured. No signs of occupancy." "Copy that, Tom, but we definitely received a 911 call from that address. The system shows it came from a landline registered to that location." That was impossible. Heggie could see that the power lines leading to the house had been disconnected years ago. The phone company would have cut service when the utilities were terminated, but someone had called for help, and his job was to make sure they were safe. He stepped out of his patrol car, flashlight in hand, and approached the house. The boards covering the windows were weathered and secure, held in place by rusted nails. The front door was padlocked, and spider webs stretched across the frame. If someone was inside, they hadn't come through the main entrance. As he walked around the perimeter of the house, his flashlight beam swept across broken siding and shattered glass. That's when he heard it. A faint tapping sound coming from inside the house. 3 quick taps, then silence, then 3 more taps. Heggie froze, listening intently. The sound was definitely coming from inside, and it had a rhythm to it, like someone was trying to communicate. "Sheriff's Department," he called out. "If someone is in there, please respond." The tapping stopped. Then, from somewhere deep inside the house, came a woman's voice. "Help me, please. He's still here." The voice was muffled, as if coming from far away, but Heggie could hear the terror in it. Someone was definitely inside, and they were in danger. He circled the house again, looking for another way in, and found that one of the boards covering a back window had been pried loose. He radioed dispatch. "Sarah, I've got confirmed sounds from inside the structure. Someone is definitely in there. I'm going to investigate." "Tom, be careful. Backup is 20 minutes out." Heggie squeezed through the loose board and dropped into what had once been the kitchen. The smell hit him immediately, a combination of mold, decay, and something else he couldn't identify. His flashlight revealed a scene of complete abandonment. Furniture covered in dust sheets, water damage on the walls, debris scattered across the floor. "Sheriff's Department," he called out again. "Where are you? Keep talking so I can find you." The response came from upstairs. "I'm in the bedroom. First door on the right. Please hurry. I can hear him moving around downstairs." Heggie's blood ran cold. If the woman was upstairs, and she could hear someone moving around downstairs, that meant he wasn't alone in the house. There was another person somewhere in the darkness with him. He drew his service weapon and began moving toward the staircase, his flashlight beam dancing across the walls. Every shadow seemed to hide a potential threat. The old wooden floors creaked under his weight, announcing his position to anyone else who might be listening. "Ma'am, this is the sheriff. I'm coming upstairs to get you. Is there another way out of the room you're in?" "No," came the weak reply. "The door is barricaded. I pushed furniture against it, but I don't think it will hold much longer." Heggie reached the top of the stairs and saw that the first door on the right was indeed blocked. Heavy furniture had been pushed against it from the inside, but something was wrong with the scene. The furniture looked old, covered in the same dust that coated everything else in the house. If someone had just moved it to barricade the door, it should have left marks in the dust. "Ma'am, I'm right outside. I'm going to help you move this furniture so you can get out." He put his shoulder against the dresser that was blocking the door and pushed. It moved easily, too easily, as if it had been placed there for show rather than as a real barricade. The door swung open and Heggie stepped into the bedroom. The room was empty. Not just empty of people, empty of everything. No furniture, no personal belongings, nothing but bare walls and a floor covered in dust that hadn't been disturbed in years. The only footprints in the dust were his own. "Hello?" he called out, confused. "Where are you?" That's when he heard his own voice coming from downstairs. "Ma'am, this is the sheriff. I'm coming upstairs to get you." Peggy's flashlight beam wavered as his hand began to shake. He had just said those exact words, but now he was hearing them again, in his own voice, coming from the floor below. He crept to the top of the stairs and looked down. In the beam of his flashlight, he could see a figure moving through the kitchen. It was wearing a sheriff's uniform, identical to his own, but something was wrong with the way it moved. The gait was too stiff, too mechanical, like someone trying to imitate human movement without understanding how it actually worked. "Is there another way out of the room you're in?" came his own voice from downstairs, repeating the exact conversation he'd just had. Peggy tried to radio dispatch, but his radio produced only static. He was trapped in an abandoned house with something that was mimicking his voice, replaying his own words back to him. The figure downstairs began climbing the staircase. In the flashlight beam, Peggy could see that it was indeed wearing a sheriff's uniform, complete with badge and utility belt. But the face was wrong, too pale, too still, like a mask made of wax. "Ma'am, I'm right outside," the thing said in Peggy's voice. "I'm going to help you move this furniture so you can get out." Peggy backed away from the stairs, looking for another exit. There was a window at the end of the hallway, but it was boarded up from the outside. He was trapped. The footsteps on the stairs were getting closer. Each step was accompanied by a wet, squelching sound, as if the thing climbing toward him was leaving a trail of something behind. That's when Peggy realized the truth. There had never been a woman in the house. The 911 call, the voice asking for help, the barricaded door, it had all been a trap. Something had been using the abandoned house as bait, luring people inside with false distress calls. The thing reached the top of the stairs and turned toward him. In the harsh LED light of his flashlight, Peggy could see that what he had mistaken for a sheriff's uniform was actually something else entirely. The fabric was wrong, too stiff and shiny, like plastic or rubber. The badge wasn't metal, but some kind of crude imitation. And the face was a grotesque approximation of human features, as if someone had tried to sculpt a person from memory and gotten all the proportions wrong. "Hello?" it said in his voice. "Where are you?" Peggy tried to run, but his legs wouldn't obey him. The thing was doing something to him, some kind of paralysis that started in his feet and began working its way up his body. He could only watch as it approached, moving with that strange mechanical gait. The last transmission from Sheriff Peggy's radio came at 3:23 a.m. "Dispatch. Something's wrong here. This isn't. The house is. Help me." Then silence. Search teams found Peggy's patrol car at 1247 Crow Creek Road the next morning. The engine was still running, the driver's door was open, and his radio was on the ground, smashed beyond repair. The house showed no signs of forced entry, and tracking dogs lost his scent at the front door. But the strangest discovery came 3 days later, when investigators played back the 911 recordings from that night. The call that had sent Sheriff Peggy to his fate hadn't come from a woman at all. Voice analysis revealed that the female caller was actually Tom Peggy himself, speaking in a higher pitch, as if someone had taken a recording of his voice and altered it. Even more disturbing was the timestamp on the call. According to the system logs, the 911 call had been placed at 2:47 a.m., exactly when Sheriff Peggy was responding to it. The call was coming from inside his own patrol car. The house at 1247 Crow Creek Road was demolished 6 months later, but locals say that doesn't matter. On quiet nights, when the wind is still and the darkness is complete, People driving past the empty lot report hearing radio chatter in Tom Heggie's voice, calling for backup that will never come. Sheriff Jake Morrison had been patrolling the lonely highways of rural Nebraska for 8 years, but he'd never experienced anything like what happened on the night shift of November 3rd, 2011. It started with what seemed like a routine traffic stop and ended with Morrison questioning everything he thought he knew about reality. The incident began at 1:15 a.m. when Morrison spotted a sedan traveling erratically on Highway 83, about 20 miles outside of town. The vehicle was weaving slightly, crossing the center line intermittently, classic signs of an impaired driver. Morrison activated his patrol lights and radioed dispatch. Unit 7 to dispatch. I'm initiating a traffic stop on Highway 83, northbound, mile marker 47. Nebraska plates. Looks like Adam David Frank 291. Dispatcher Kelly Martinez acknowledged. Copy that, Unit 7. Running the plates now. What made Morrison uneasy wasn't the traffic stop itself. He'd performed thousands of them over the years. It was something about the way the sedan responded to his lights. Instead of gradually slowing and pulling over like most drivers, the vehicle seemed to accelerate slightly before finally coming to a stop on the shoulder. Morrison positioned his patrol car behind the sedan, leaving his emergency lights activated. Standard protocol. He grabbed his flashlight and stepped out, approaching the driver's side window with caution. But as he got closer, something made him stop in his tracks. The rear window of the sedan was reflecting his patrol car's flashing lights, but the reflection was wrong. Instead of showing his own patrol car behind the sedan, the reflection showed a different scene entirely. Another patrol car, positioned at a different angle, with what appeared to be a body lying on the ground beside it. Morrison blinked hard and looked again. The reflection was normal now, just his own emergency lights bouncing off the glass. He shook his head, attributing the strange vision to fatigue. He'd been working double shifts all week to cover for a colleague who was out sick. "Sir, this is the sheriff," Morrison called out as he approached the driver's window. "I need you to turn off your engine and keep your hands visible." The window rolled down slowly, revealing the driver, a middle-aged man with pale skin and dark, sunken eyes. He was wearing a heavy winter coat, despite the mild November weather, and there was something about his expression that made Morrison's instincts flare. "Good evening, officer," the man said, his voice unnaturally calm. "Is there a problem?" "I clocked you weaving back there," Morrison replied, keeping his flashlight trained on the man's hands. "Have you been drinking tonight?" The man smiled, and Morrison noticed that his teeth were stained yellow, almost brown. "No, officer, I don't drink. I was just distracted by something I saw in my rearview mirror." "What did you see?" The man's smile widened. "I saw you die." Morrison's hand instinctively moved toward his service weapon. "Excuse me?" "About 2 minutes from now," the man continued conversationally, "you're going to walk back to your patrol car to run my license. But you won't make it. Something's going to happen, something that will end your life right here on this stretch of highway." Morrison felt a chill run down his spine, but he forced himself to remain professional. He'd dealt with mentally unstable individuals before. The key was to stay calm and not escalate the situation. "Sir, I'm going to need to see your license and registration." The man reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a wallet. As he handed over his license, Morrison noticed that the man's fingers were unusually long and thin, almost skeletal. The license identified him as Robert Henley, age 54, with an address about 30 miles south. "Mr. Henley, I'm going to check your information. Please remain in your vehicle." Morrison began walking back toward his patrol car, but something made him glance over his shoulder. Henley was watching him in the side mirror, and the man's expression had changed completely. Gone was the unsettling calm. Now his face showed what looked like anticipation, almost excitement. Morrison's radio crackled as he reached his patrol car. "Unit 7, this is dispatch. That license comes back clean, but Jake, there's something odd about the address. We show that residence as being unoccupied for the past 6 years." "Copy that," Morrison replied, but his attention was focused on something else. In his peripheral vision, he could see headlights approaching from the south. Another vehicle traveling at high speed toward their location. That's when Morrison saw it again. The reflection that shouldn't exist. This time, it wasn't in the sedan's rear window, but in his own patrol car's windshield. The reflection showed the same scene he'd glimpsed earlier. A patrol car on the side of the highway, emergency lights flashing, and a body in a sheriff's uniform lying motionless on the asphalt. But now he could see more details. The body was face down, arms spread wide, a dark pool spreading beneath it. And the uniform. Morrison's heart stopped. The uniform was identical to his own, right down to the name tag that read Morrison. The approaching headlights were getting closer, and Morrison realized they belonged to a large truck traveling well above the speed limit. The truck was drifting into the oncoming lane, directly toward where Morrison's patrol car was parked. "Jesus," Morrison breathed, diving away from his vehicle just as the truck slammed into it. The impact was tremendous. Morrison's patrol car was crushed against the sedan, metal screaming against metal, glass exploding in all directions. The truck driver, apparently asleep at the wheel, never hit his brakes. Morrison rolled away from the wreckage, his ears ringing from the crash. He was scraped and bruised, but alive. As he struggled to his feet, he looked back at the destruction and felt his blood run cold. There, lying on the asphalt exactly where he had seen it in the reflection, was a body in a sheriff's uniform. The figure was face down, arms spread wide, just as Morrison had witnessed in the impossible reflection. But it wasn't Morrison. It was someone else wearing an identical uniform, down to the name tag. With shaking hands, Morrison approached the body and carefully turned it over. The face that stared back at him was his own, but it was wrong somehow. The features were too perfect, too symmetrical, like a wax figure or a computer-generated image of what Jake Morrison should look like. Morrison stumbled backward, his mind reeling. He looked around for Robert Henley, but the man was nowhere to be found. The sedan was empty, its driver's door hanging open. Morrison called out, but there was no response. His radio was somewhere in the wreckage of his patrol car, so Morrison used his cell phone to call dispatch. "Kelly, this is Jake. I need ambulances and backup at my location immediately. There's been a serious accident." "Jake? But you just radioed in 2 minutes ago saying everything was fine, and you were letting the driver go with a warning." Morrison felt the world tilt around him. "I never radioed that in. My radio was destroyed in the crash." There was a long pause. "Jake, according to our logs, you radioed an all clear at 1:28 a.m. and reported that you were resuming patrol. That was 3 minutes ago." Morrison looked at his phone. The time showed 1:31 a.m., but that was impossible. The entire encounter with Robert Henley had lasted at least 15 minutes. Emergency responders arrived within 10 minutes, but they found a scene that defied explanation. There were 3 vehicles involved in the accident: Morrison's patrol car, the sedan, and the truck. But there were only 2 bodies. The truck driver, who had suffered a fatal heart attack at the wheel, and the figure in the sheriff's uniform that looked exactly like Jake Morrison. The sedan's registration traced back to Robert Henley, But when investigators went to the address on his license, they found an empty house that had been abandoned since 2005. Neighbors confirmed that no one named Robert Henley had ever lived there. The most disturbing discovery came when the coroner examined the body that looked like Morrison. The autopsy revealed that the figure wasn't entirely human. While it had human DNA that matched Morrison's own, there were subtle differences. Too many ribs, organs in slightly wrong positions, teeth that were too perfect. It was as if someone had tried to create a copy of Jake Morrison using an incomplete blueprint. Morrison returned to duty 2 weeks later, but he was never the same. He reported seeing his own patrol car in impossible places, sometimes following him during his rounds, sometimes parked at locations where he was supposed to be, but wasn't. Other officers began reporting similar sightings. Jake Morrison's patrol car had 2 different locations simultaneously, or radio calls in Morrison's voice when he was confirmed to be off duty. The strangest incidents occurred during traffic stops. Multiple drivers reported being pulled over by Sheriff Morrison, only to have him approach their vehicle and say, "I'm going to check your information, but first, do you see anything unusual in your mirrors?" Those who looked would glimpse the same impossible reflection Morrison had seen that night. A patrol car on the side of the highway, emergency lights flashing, and a body in a sheriff's uniform lying motionless on the asphalt. Morrison tried to explain what had happened to his colleagues, to his superiors, even to his family. But how do you tell people that you witnessed your own death, that you found your own body at the scene of an accident, that somewhere out there is something wearing your face and driving a patrol car identical to yours? 3 months after the incident, Morrison put in for early retirement. His replacement found something troubling in the patrol car Morrison had been using. Wedged under the driver's seat was a driver's license belonging to Robert Henley. But this license was different from the one Morrison remembered. The photo showed the same man, but the address was different, and the expiration date was 30 years in the future. On the back of the license, written in Morrison's own handwriting, was a single sentence: "He's still out there, and he's learning." Morrison moved to Florida and took a job as a mall security guard, as far from law enforcement as he could get. But sometimes, late at night, he still gets calls on his cell phone. When he answers, he hears his own voice saying, "Good evening, officer. Is there a problem?" Deputy Sheriff Marcus Chen had been wearing a body camera for 3 years as part of his department's transparency initiative in rural Oregon. The small device clipped to his uniform had recorded hundreds of hours of routine patrols, traffic stops, and incident responses. But the footage captured on September 15, 2018, would become the most analyzed and controversial recording in the department's history. It started as a wellness check call at 11:47 p.m. An elderly neighbor had reported not seeing lights or activity at the Hartwell farmhouse for over a week, which was unusual for the family of 4 who lived there. The property was located 15 miles outside of town, on a dirt road that wound through dense Oregon forest, the kind of place where people valued their privacy and problems could go unnoticed for weeks. Chen's body camera automatically activated when he stepped out of his patrol car in the Hartwell driveway. The timestamp in the corner read 23:52:14 as his flashlight beam swept across the property. The farmhouse was completely dark, no vehicles in the driveway, and an eerie silence hung over the scene. "This is Deputy Chen, badge number 247, he said into his radio. "I'm at the Hartwell residence for a wellness check. No signs of activity. I'm going to check the perimeter and attempt to make contact." The body camera captured Chen's approach to the front door, the beam of his flashlight dancing across peeling paint and weathered wood. He knocked firmly and called out, "Sheriff's Department, Mr. Hartwell, Mrs. Hartwell, is everyone okay in there? No response. The house remained silent and dark. Chen walked around the property, his camera recording everything. The backyard showed signs of normal family life. A swing set, some gardening tools, children's toys scattered on the lawn. But there was something that made Chen pause. The camera captured him, stopping and focusing his flashlight on the ground near the back porch. There were footprints in the mud, lots of them, but they weren't leading to or from the house. Instead, they seemed to circle the building repeatedly, as if someone had been walking around and around the structure for hours. The prints were deep and evenly spaced, suggesting someone moving at a slow, steady pace. "Dispatch, I've got some unusual markings here," Chen radioed. "Looks like someone's been walking circles around the house. I'm going to check if there's a way inside." The body camera recorded Chen testing the back door. It was unlocked. As he pushed it open, the hinges creaked loudly in the silence. Chen drew his flashlight and stepped inside, calling out again. "Sheriff's Department, if anyone is in the house, please respond." The interior of the house was captured in stark detail by Chen's camera. The kitchen looked normal. Dishes on the counter, a half-empty coffee pot, a newspaper folded on the table dated September 8th, 7 days earlier. But as Chen moved deeper into the house, the footage began showing increasingly disturbing details. In the living room, all the furniture had been pushed against the walls, leaving a large empty space in the center. The carpet in that space was worn down to the backing, as if from heavy foot traffic. Chen's camera caught him kneeling to examine the worn area more closely. "What the hell?" Chen muttered, and the camera's audio picked up his confusion clearly. The wear pattern in the carpet matched the footprints outside, a perfect circle, as if someone had been walking in endless loops, both inside and outside the house. Chen continued his search, moving upstairs to check the bedrooms. The camera footage from this part of the investigation would later be studied frame by digital forensics experts, because what it captured seemed to defy explanation. In the master bedroom, Chen found the Hartwell family. They were standing in the corner of the room, perfectly still, facing the wall. All four of them, parents and two children, arranged in a line, motionless. Chen's camera captured his sharp intake of breath as his flashlight beam found them. "Jesus Christ," Chen whispered. "Dispatch, I need backup and EMS immediately. I've found the family, but something's wrong here." Chen approached cautiously, calling out to them. But none of the four figures responded. As he got closer, his camera revealed why. They weren't alive, but they weren't exactly dead either. The Hartwell family stood with perfect posture, eyes open, staring at the wall. Their skin had a waxy, artificial appearance, like mannequins. But Chen's camera caught the most disturbing detail when he moved his flashlight. Their feet were worn down to the bone, as if they had been walking for days without stopping. "My God," Chen breathed, backing away from the figures. "Dispatch, I need the coroner out here immediately. I don't know what this is." That's when Chen heard the footsteps downstairs, slow, steady footsteps moving in a circle through the living room. The body camera's audio picked up the rhythmic sound clearly. Step, 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 in an endless loop. Chen drew his service weapon and moved toward the staircase. "Sheriff's Department, who's down there? Show yourself." The footsteps continued, unchanged by his commands. Chen's camera recorded his descent down the stairs, the beam of his flashlight cutting through the darkness. When he reached the living room, he found the source of the footsteps. It was another figure, walking in the same circular pattern worn into the carpet. But this figure was different from the family upstairs. It was tall, impossibly thin, wearing clothes that might have once been a suit, but were now tattered and stained. The figure's face was obscured by shadow, but Chen's camera caught glimpses of pale skin, stretched tight over angular bones. "Stop! Put your hands where I can see them," Chen commanded, but the figure continued its endless walk, paying no attention to the deputy's presence. Chen tried to intercept the figure's path, but something strange happened. Every time he moved to block the walking pattern, the figure would simply walk through the space where Chen was standing, as if the deputy wasn't there at all. The body camera footage shows Chen's growing panic as he tried repeatedly to make contact with the walking figure. His radio calls became increasingly frantic. "Dispatch, I need backup now. There's something seriously wrong here." But dispatch wasn't responding. Chen's radio produced only static. That's when Chen noticed something that made his blood run cold. In the reflection of a mirror hanging on the living room wall, he could see himself clearly in his body camera footage. But the walking figure cast no reflection at all. Chen backed toward the front door, his camera capturing the impossible scene. A figure walking in endless circles, leaving no reflection, while upstairs, a family stood motionless, with their feet worn to bone. As he reached for the door handle, Chen heard something that stopped him cold. Footsteps upstairs, the same slow, steady rhythm. The camera's audio picked up the sound clearly. The Hartwell family had started walking. Chen could hear them moving around the bedroom above, their bone-exposed feet scraping against the wooden floor. Chen burst through the front door and ran to his patrol car, his body camera bouncing wildly, but still recording. As he reached his vehicle, he turned back toward the house, and his camera captured something that investigators still can't explain. Every window in the house was now lit up, but not with electric light. The glow was pale and cold, like moonlight. And in every window, Chen's camera recorded the silhouettes of figures walking in circles. Not just the Hartwell family, but dozens of figures, all moving in the same endless, hypnotic pattern. Chen's final radio transmission was captured clearly by his body camera. "This is Deputy Chen. I'm leaving the Hartwell property immediately. Do not send backup. Do not come here. Something is very wrong with this place." The body camera footage cuts off at 00:47:33, exactly 55 minutes after Chen had arrived at the property. When Chen failed to report in the next morning, a search team was dispatched to find him. They discovered his patrol car in the Hartwell driveway, engine still running, driver's door open. Chen was nowhere to be found. Inside the house, investigators found the Hartwell family exactly as Chen's camera had recorded them, standing in the corner of the master bedroom facing the wall. But they weren't the waxy figures Chen had encountered. They were normally deceased, having died approximately 7 days earlier from what the coroner determined was dehydration and exhaustion. The circular wear patterns in the carpet and the footprints outside remained unexplained. Chen's body camera was found clipped to a tree about 50 yards from the house. When investigators reviewed the footage, they discovered something that made the case even more disturbing. The timestamp showed that the camera had continued recording for 3 hours after Chen disappeared. Those 3 hours of footage showed the empty Hartwell property from the camera's position on the tree. But at regular intervals, exactly every 17 minutes, a figure in a deputy's uniform would walk into frame, circle the house once, and disappear back into the forest. The figure's gait was slow and steady, identical to the walking pattern Chen had observed inside the house. Digital analysis confirmed that the figure in the extended footage was Deputy Marcus Chen, but Chen had been missing for 3 hours when that footage was recorded. The most disturbing discovery came when investigators examined the final frame of the body camera footage. Enhanced and enlarged, it showed something that had been missed in the initial review. In the reflection of Chen's patrol car window, barely visible in the darkness, was the image of Chen himself, standing among the figures in the lit windows of the house, walking in the same endless circle as all the others. Deputy Marcus Chen was never found. The Hartwell property was seized by the county and demolished 6 months later. But locals report that on certain nights, when the fog rolls in thick through the Oregon forest, you can still see lights in the windows of a house that no longer exists, and hear the sound of footsteps walking in circles through rooms that have been reduced to empty foundation. Sheriff Linda Vasquez had been working alone at the county jail in rural New Mexico for 6 years, pulling the midnight shift that nobody else wanted. The facility was small, just 8 cells in a single-story building that served 3 counties. Most nights, she'd have maybe 2 or 3 inmates sleeping off drunk and disorderly charges. But on the night of December 21st, 2016, something walked into her jail that would change everything she thought she knew about her job. It was 2:15 a.m. when the front door buzzer sounded. Vasquez looked up from her paperwork to see a figure standing outside the reinforced glass entrance. The person was tall, wearing what appeared to be an orange jumpsuit, and had their hands pressed against the glass in an almost pleading gesture. Vasquez approached the door cautiously. In 6 years of working nights, she'd never had someone show up at the jail voluntarily in the middle of the night. The security camera feed showed a man, probably in his 30s, with short dark hair and pale skin. His jumpsuit looked standard issue, but something about his posture made Vasquez uneasy. "Can I help you?" she called through the intercom. The man's voice came through the speaker, muffled but audible. "I need to turn myself in. I escaped from county transport 3 days ago." Vasquez frowned. She hadn't received any bulletins about escaped prisoners, and protocol required her to verify any claims before processing anyone into custody. "What's your name? What facility were you being transported from?" "Daniel Morrison. I was being transferred from Cibola County to the state penitentiary. The transport van crashed on Highway 60 and I ran. But I can't keep running." Vasquez checked her computer system. There had indeed been a transport accident on Highway 60 3 days earlier, but according to the report, all prisoners had been accounted for. No escapes reported. Still, paperwork could be wrong, and the man seemed genuinely distressed. "I'm going to need to verify your information before I can process you," Vasquez said. "Step back from the door." She opened the reinforced entrance and gestured for Morrison to enter. As he walked past her, Vasquez noticed something strange. The man cast no shadow under the bright fluorescent lights of the intake area. She blinked and looked again, attributing it to fatigue. Morrison stood quietly while Vasquez began the intake process. He answered her questions in a monotone voice, providing details that seemed accurate when she cross-referenced them with her database. Daniel Morrison, 34, arrested for armed robbery, sentenced to 15 years. The photo in the system matched the man standing in front of her, but there were discrepancies. The arrest date was listed as December 18, 2016, 3 days ago, the same day as the transport accident. But according to the system, Morrison had been sentenced 15 years ago and had been in prison ever since. The dates didn't make sense. "Mr. Morrison, there seems to be some confusion with your records. Can you tell me exactly when you were arrested?" Morrison's response made Vasquez's blood run cold. "I was arrested 15 years ago. I've been in prison ever since, until 3 days ago, when I died in the transport crash." Vasquez's hand instinctively moved toward her service weapon. "Excuse me?" The van rolled 3 times before hitting the guardrail. I was thrown through the rear window. Broke my neck on impact. But somehow, I got up and started walking. I've been walking for 3 days, trying to figure out where I belong. Vasquez studied Morrison's face carefully. His skin was pale, almost gray, and there was something wrong with his eyes. They were completely black, no visible pupils or iris. She reached for her radio to call for backup, but Morrison held up his hands. "Please don't. I'm not here to hurt anyone. I just want to go back to my cell. I think that's where I'm supposed to be." Despite every instinct screaming at her to get this man out of her facility, Vasquez found herself considering his request. There was something pathetic about Morrison, something desperate and lost, that made her hesitate. "I need to make some phone calls first," she said. "Have a seat over there." Morrison sat down on the intake bench and remained perfectly still, while Vasquez tried to contact the transport company and the state corrections department. But every number she called went straight to voicemail or busy signals. It was as if the entire corrections system had shut down for the night. After an hour of failed attempts to verify Morrison's story, Vasquez made a decision that would haunt her for the rest of her career. She processed him into the jail, assigning him to cell 6, which was isolated from the other inmates. "Morrison, you'll be in protective custody until we can sort this out," she told him as she escorted him down the hallway. "Someone will be here in the morning to verify your story." Morrison nodded and walked quietly to his cell. As Vasquez locked the door behind him, she noticed that the cell temperature had dropped noticeably. Her breath was visible in small puffs as she checked the lock. "Is there anything you need?" she asked through the bars. Morrison sat on the narrow cot and looked directly at her. "How long have I been dead?" The question sent chills down Vasquez's spine, but she tried to maintain her professional composure. "Mr. Morrison, you're not dead. You're here. You're talking to me. Dead people don't walk into jails." Morrison smiled, and Vasquez saw that his teeth were stained dark brown, almost black. "Then why can't I feel my heartbeat? Why don't I cast a shadow? Why is my skin so cold?" Vasquez backed away from the cell door. She had noticed the missing shadow earlier, and now that Morrison mentioned it, the temperature drop was impossible to ignore. She returned to her desk and tried to focus on her paperwork, but every few minutes, she found herself glancing down the hallway towards cell 6. Around 4 a.m., the other inmates began acting strangely. The two men in cells 1 and 2 started pacing frantically, muttering to themselves about the cold one and the dead man in 6. The woman in cell 4, who had been sleeping peacefully since her booking for public intoxication, began screaming about shadows moving in the walls. Vasquez checked the security monitors and saw something that made her question her sanity. The camera covering the hallway showed all the cell doors, including cell 6. But while the other cells showed clear images of their occupants, cell 6 appeared empty on the monitor, even though Vasquez could see Morrison sitting on his cot when she looked down the hallway with her own eyes. At 5:30 a.m., Morrison called out to her, "Sheriff Vasquez, could you come here, please? I have something to show you." Against her better judgment, Vasquez approached cell 6. Morrison was standing at the bars, and in the dim hallway lighting, she could see that his orange jumpsuit was torn and stained with what looked like dried blood. "I remember now," Morrison said quietly. "I remember the crash, the metal going through my chest, the feeling of my ribs breaking, the moment when everything went black." Morrison lifted his jumpsuit, revealing a massive wound across his torso. The injury was clearly fatal. Vasquez could see broken ribs protruding from torn flesh, and there was no sign of bleeding or healing. "I died in that crash, Sheriff. But something won't let me rest. Something keeps pulling me back to places like this. Jails, prisons, places where I spent so much of my life." Vasquez stumbled backward, her mind reeling. "This isn't possible. You're talking to me. You walked in here." Dead doesn't always mean gone, Morrison replied. Sometimes it just means lost. As the sun began to rise, Vasquez called her supervisor and requested immediate assistance. When the day shift arrived at 7 a.m., they found Vasquez sitting at her desk, staring blankly at the hallway. "Linda, are you okay?" asked Deputy Martinez, her replacement. "Check cell 6, Vasquez whispered. Martinez walked down the hallway and peered into the cell. "It's empty, Linda. Cell 6 has been empty all night." But when Martinez checked the intake log, he found an entry in Vasquez's handwriting. Daniel Morrison, processed at 0315 hours, assigned to cell 6, protective custody. The security footage from that night was reviewed by investigators, but the cameras showed Vasquez talking to empty air during the intake process and then escorting no one down the hallway to the cells. The footage appeared to show her having conversations with invisible people and opening cell 6 for no apparent reason. However, there were physical evidence that couldn't be explained. Cell 6 showed signs of occupancy. The cot was disturbed, there were footprints on the floor, and the temperature in that cell measured 15 degrees colder than the rest of the facility. Most disturbing was what investigators found when they examined the transport accident from 3 days earlier. Daniel Morrison had indeed been killed in the crash, exactly as he had described to Vasquez. His body had been recovered from the wreckage and was currently in the county morgue, awaiting burial. The coroner confirmed that Morrison had been dead for 3 days when Vasquez claimed to have processed him into the jail. Vasquez took early retirement immediately after the incident. She moved to Arizona and refused to discuss what happened that night with anyone, including her family. But sometimes, late at night, she still gets phone calls on her home phone. When she answers, she hears a familiar voice saying, "Sheriff Vasquez, I think I'm ready to go back to my cell now." The county jail was closed permanently 6 months later, after multiple staff members reported similar encounters with inmates who had died years earlier, but still showed up requesting to be locked up. The building now sits empty, but locals report seeing lights in the cell windows at night and hearing the sound of metal doors slamming shut in a building that no longer has power. Sheriff Rick Coleman had been monitoring police radio frequencies in rural Texas for 14 years, but he'd never heard anything like the transmission that came through at 3:33 a.m. on August 14, 2019. It started as a routine night shift in Brewster County, one of the most isolated regions in the state, where Coleman often went hours without seeing another person. The emergency broadcast began as a faint signal cutting through the static of his patrol car radio. At first, Coleman thought it might be interference from a distant station, but as he turned up the volume, he realized it was a distress call from another law enforcement officer. "This is Sheriff Martinez, badge number 451, requesting immediate backup at mile marker 23 on Ranch Road 170. I have multiple casualties, possible mass casualty event. Repeat, I need all available units to respond immediately." Coleman grabbed his radio transmitter. He knew every officer in the surrounding counties, but there was no Sheriff Martinez with badge number 451 in the area. Still, the desperation in the voice was unmistakable, and Coleman had never heard anyone fake that level of panic. "This is Sheriff Coleman, Brewster County. Martinez, what's your location again? I'm not familiar with your department." There was a long pause, filled with static, before the response came. "Coleman? Rick Coleman? Jesus Christ, Rick, I thought you were dead. Where are you?" Coleman felt a chill run down his spine. The voice on the radio knew his name and seemed to know him personally, but Coleman was certain he'd never met any Sheriff Martinez. "Martinez, I'm alive and well. What's your status? Do you need medical assistance?" "Rick, listen to me carefully. Whatever you do, Don't go to the old Morrison Ranch tonight. There's something wrong there. Something that killed my entire department. I'm the only one left, and I don't think I'm going to make it much longer." Coleman's blood ran cold. The Morrison Ranch was exactly where he'd been heading. He'd received a call about possible trespassing on the abandoned property about 20 minutes earlier. It was a routine call, the kind he handled several times a month when teenagers or transients decided to explore the empty buildings. "Martinez, I copy your warning, but I need to know, what department are you with? I need to coordinate with dispatch." The response that came through the radio made Coleman's hands shake. "I'm with Brewster County Sheriff's Department, Rick. I'm your replacement. You died 3 years ago in a car accident on Ranch Road 170. Don't you remember?" Coleman pulled his patrol car over to the side of the road. His heart was pounding, and his mouth felt dry. "That's impossible. I'm sitting right here. I'm alive." "Rick, check your dashboard clock. What time does it show?" Coleman looked at his dashboard. The digital clock read 3:33 a.m., August 14th, 2016. But that was wrong. It should have been 2019. Coleman had distinct memories of the past 3 years, of patrols he'd conducted, cases he'd worked, holidays he'd celebrated with his family. "The clock is wrong," Coleman said into his radio. "It's 2019, not 2016. "Rick, you died on August 14th, 2016 at 3:34 a.m. You were responding to a trespassing call at the Morrison Ranch when your patrol car went off the road. They found you wrapped around a tree about a mile from the property." Coleman's radio crackled with interference, and Martinez's voice became clearer, more urgent. "Rick, you've been patrolling the same route every night for 3 years. The same calls, the same responses, the same death. You're trapped in the last hour of your life, and somehow I got pulled into it." Coleman looked around frantically. The landscape outside his patrol car looked familiar, but now he noticed details that seemed wrong. The roadside markers were weathered and faded, as if they hadn't been maintained in years. The fence posts along the road were broken and leaning. Everything had a gray, lifeless quality that he hadn't noticed before. "This isn't real," Coleman whispered into his radio. "This can't be real." "It's real, Rick, but it's not alive. You need to break the cycle. Don't go to the Morrison Ranch. Don't complete your final call." Coleman checked his patrol log and felt his world collapse around him. Every entry was identical. 3:15 a.m. Trespassing call, Morrison Ranch. 3:20 a.m. En route to location. 3:34 a.m. Entry ends. The log showed the same entries repeated hundreds of times, all with the same dates and times, all ending abruptly at 3:34 a.m. "Martinez, how long have you been trying to reach me?" 3 years, Rick. I've been sheriff of Brewster County for 3 years, and every night at 3:33 a.m., I get pulled into your radio frequency. I watch you drive toward your death, and I try to warn you, but you never listen. You always complete the call." Coleman looked at his dashboard clock again. 3:34 a.m. was approaching fast. He could feel something pulling him forward, an irresistible compulsion to continue toward the Morrison Ranch. His foot pressed down on the accelerator almost against his will. "I can't stop," Coleman said into his radio. "Something's making me drive there." "Fight it, Rick. You have to break the pattern." But Coleman's patrol car was already moving faster down Ranch Road 170. The speedometer climbed past the safe speed for the curving road, just as it had hundreds of times before. Coleman tried to brake, but his foot wouldn't obey his mind. "Martinez, I can see the ranch ahead. There are lights in the windows, but that place has been abandoned for years." "Those aren't real lights, Rick. That's what killed my deputies when they tried to investigate. Don't look at the lights." But Coleman couldn't help himself. As his patrol car approached the Morrison Ranch, he saw figures moving in the illuminated windows. They looked like people, but their movements were wrong. Too stiff, too repetitive, like broken dolls. The figures in the windows all turned to look at Coleman's approaching patrol car, and he realized with horror that they all had his face. Dozens of Rick Colemans, all wearing sheriff's uniforms, all staring out from the ranch house with empty, dead expressions. Martinez, they all look like me. How is that possible? Every night you die, Rick. But something at that ranch collects the deaths, stores them. Those are all your deaths from the past 3 years. Coleman's patrol car was now racing toward the sharp curve that would end his life. He could see the tree that would kill him, the same oak tree that had claimed him hundreds of times before. But this time, something was different. This time, he could see another patrol car already wrapped around the tree, and another one, and another. The roadside was littered with identical patrol cars, all with Brewster County Sheriff painted on the doors, all containing the same dead body behind the wheel. Oh God, Coleman breathed into his radio. How many times have I died? Every night for 3 years, Rick. 1,095 times. But tonight can be different. Tonight you can choose to stop. Coleman gripped the steering wheel and fought against the compulsion driving him forward. With tremendous effort, he managed to slow the patrol car just enough to avoid the tree. The car went off the road, but didn't hit the oak. Instead, it rolled several times before coming to rest in a ditch. Coleman crawled out of the wreckage, battered but alive. His radio was damaged, but Martinez's voice came through weakly. Rick? Rick, are you there? I'm here. I'm alive. Good. Now look at the ranch. Coleman turned toward the Morrison property and saw that the lights in the windows were going out one by one. The figures he had seen were fading away, dissolving like smoke. The compulsion that had been driving him toward his death was lifting. It's over, Martinez's voice said through the static. You broke the cycle. Coleman walked back toward the road, planning to radio for assistance. But when he reached the asphalt, he found something that made him question everything again. There, scattered along Ranch Road 170, were the remnants of over 1,000 patrol cars, rusted, weathered, some barely recognizable as vehicles. And standing among the wreckage was Sheriff Martinez, a man Coleman now recognized as an older version of himself. Hello, Rick, Martinez said. I'm you. 30 years from now. I became sheriff after you died, and I've been trying to save you ever since. Coleman stared at his older self in disbelief. That's impossible. Time works differently when you're dead, Rick. I've lived 30 years since your accident, but for you, it's been the same hour repeating over and over. I finally figured out how to break through your death loop, but it took me 3 years of trying. The older Coleman smiled sadly. You can rest now, Rick. Your death has been resolved, but I have to stay. There are other officers out there, trapped in their own death loops, and they need someone to guide them home. As the sun began to rise over Ranch Road 170, the younger Coleman felt himself fading away, finally able to move on from the endless repetition of his final hour. The last thing he heard was Martinez's voice on the radio, reaching out to another trapped officer. This is Sheriff Martinez, badge number 451. Can you hear me? I'm here to help. The Morrison Ranch was demolished 6 months later, but locals report that strange radio transmissions still come through at 3:33 a.m. Officers driving alone on night shifts sometimes pick up a voice offering guidance and warning them away from dangerous calls, a voice that belongs to Sheriff Martinez, the guardian of dead lawmen who refuses to rest until all his fellow officers find peace. Sheriff Amanda Cross had been patrolling the back roads of rural Idaho for 9 years, but she'd never encountered anything like what started happening in October 2020. It began with reports from local residents about seeing her patrol car in places where she definitely wasn't, and it escalated into something that would force her to question the very nature of reality. The first call came in on October 15th at 6:47 p.m. Mrs. Eleanor Hartman, an elderly woman who lived alone on Birch Creek Road, phoned the dispatcher in a state of confusion. "I just saw Sheriff Cross drive past my house," Mrs. Hartman reported, "but she was driving backwards, real slow-like, and when I waved at her, she didn't wave back. Just kept staring straight ahead with this blank expression." Dispatcher Tom Willis knew that Sheriff Cross was currently at the county courthouse, filing paperwork from an earlier arrest. She'd been there for over an hour and hadn't left the building. Willis radioed Cross to inform her of the strange sighting. "Amanda, we just got a call from Mrs. Hartman. Says she saw your patrol car on Birch Creek Road about 10 minutes ago. You weren't out there, were you?" Cross's voice came back immediately. "Negative, Tom. I've been at the courthouse since 5:30. Haven't left the building." "That's what I figured. Probably just someone with a similar vehicle. I'll make a note." But it wasn't an isolated incident. Over the next week, calls continued to pour in from residents across the county, all reporting sightings of Sheriff Cross's patrol car engaged in bizarre behavior. The reports were consistent in their strangeness. The patrol car would drive slowly through residential areas in the middle of the night, always with Sheriff Cross visible behind the wheel, but she would never respond to people who tried to flag her down. On October 22nd, Cross decided to investigate the reports herself. She began patrolling the areas where the sightings had occurred, hoping to catch whoever was impersonating her. What she discovered that night would haunt her for the rest of her life. At 11:15 p.m., Cross was driving down Birch Creek Road when she saw something that made her slam on her brakes. About 200 yards ahead, illuminated by her headlights, was another patrol car, identical to hers. Same make, same model, same department markings, same license plate number. Cross radioed dispatch immediately. "Tom, I've got a visual on the imposter vehicle. Birch Creek Road, near the old Miller farm. I'm going to make contact." "Copy that, Amanda. Be careful." Cross approached the other patrol car slowly, her hand resting on her service weapon. As she got closer, she could see a figure behind the wheel wearing a sheriff's uniform. The figure was perfectly still, staring straight ahead through the windshield. Cross parked about 30 feet behind the duplicate patrol car and stepped out, her flashlight trained on the other vehicle. "Sheriff's Department, exit your vehicle with your hands visible." The figure behind the wheel didn't move, didn't even acknowledge Cross's commands. Cross approached the driver's side window and tapped on the glass with her flashlight. "I said exit the vehicle." That's when the figure slowly turned to look at her, and Cross felt her blood turn to ice. The face staring back at her was her own, but it was wrong. The features were correct, but the expression was completely blank, like a mannequin. The eyes were open but lifeless, staring without any sign of consciousness or awareness. Cross stumbled backward, her heart pounding. "What the hell?" The duplicate Cross behind the wheel smiled, a mechanical, emotionless expression that didn't reach the dead eyes. Then it mouthed words that Cross could see clearly through the window. "You can't stop us." Cross tried to radio for backup, but her radio produced only static. Her cell phone showed no signal. She was completely cut off from communication, alone on a dark road with something that looked exactly like her, but definitely wasn't human. The duplicate patrol car's engine started, and it began to move. But instead of driving forward or backward like a normal vehicle, it moved sideways, sliding across the asphalt, without turning its wheels. Cross watched in horror as the impossible vehicle glided into the darkness and disappeared. Cross spent the rest of the night searching the area, but found no trace of the duplicate patrol car or its driver. When she returned to the station the next morning, she filed a report about the incident, but her superiors were skeptical. "Amanda, you've been working a lot of overtime lately," Chief Morrison said. "Maybe you should take a few days off, get some rest." But Cross knew what she had seen, and she was determined to get to the bottom of it. She began investigating the history of her patrol car, hoping to find some explanation for what was happening. What she discovered in the department's maintenance records made her blood run cold. According to the files, her patrol car, unit number 47, had been involved in a fatal accident 3 years earlier. The previous driver, Deputy Sarah Kellerman, had been killed when the vehicle rolled over during a high-speed pursuit. But here's what made Cross's hands shake as she read the report. Deputy Kellerman had looked almost identical to Cross. Same height, same build, same hair color. They could have been sisters. Cross dug deeper into Kellerman's death and found something even more disturbing. According to witness reports from the night Kellerman died, people had continued seeing her patrol car for weeks after the accident, driving the same routes she had patrolled in life. The sightings had eventually stopped, but now they were starting again. Except now, the figure behind the wheel looked like Cross instead of Kellerman. That night, Cross decided to stake out Birch Creek Road again, hoping to capture evidence of what was happening. She parked in a concealed location and waited with a camera, determined to document whatever appeared. At exactly 11:15 p.m., the same time as her previous encounter, the duplicate patrol car appeared again. But this time, Cross saw something that made her question her own sanity. There wasn't just one duplicate car. There were dozens of them. An entire convoy of identical patrol cars moved slowly down Birch Creek Road, each one containing a figure that looked like Sheriff Amanda Cross. But each figure was slightly different. Some had longer hair. Some were wearing different uniforms. Some appeared to be different ages. It was as if Cross was seeing multiple versions of herself from different timelines or realities. Cross tried to photograph the convoy, but her camera malfunctioned, producing only black images. She tried to follow the vehicles, but her own patrol car wouldn't start. She could only watch as the impossible procession glided silently into the darkness. The next morning, Cross discovered something that shattered her understanding of reality. When she arrived at the station, Chief Morrison was waiting for her with a concerned expression. "Amanda, we need to talk. Tom received some disturbing calls overnight." "What kind of calls?" "Multiple reports of you driving erratically through town around midnight. But according to your timesheet, you clocked out at 6 p.m. yesterday and went home." Cross felt the world spinning around her. "That's impossible. I was home all night." Chief Morrison showed her the call logs. 7 different residents had reported seeing Sheriff Cross driving through residential areas between 11 p.m. and 2 a.m., behaving strangely and not responding to attempts at contact. "Amanda, I need to ask, do you have any memory of being out on patrol last night?" Cross started to say no, but then a terrible doubt crept into her mind. Did she remember going home? She remembered staking out Birch Creek Road, but after that, her memory became fuzzy. Had she actually gone home, or had she joined the convoy of duplicate patrol cars? Over the following weeks, the sightings intensified. Cross would receive reports of her own patrol car being seen in multiple locations simultaneously. Residents would call to complain about Sheriff Cross ignoring their attempts to flag her down for help, even though Cross had solid alibis for her whereabouts during those times. The breaking point came on November 7th, when Cross received a call that made her realize the full horror of her situation. "Sheriff Cross, came a frightened voice over the phone. "This is Janet Murphy on Oak Street. I'm calling because, well, this is going to sound crazy, but I'm looking out my window right now, and I can see you sitting in your patrol car across the street. You've been there for about an hour, just staring at my house. But I know you're not really there, because I can hear you talking to me on the phone." Cross looked out the window of her office at the station. She could see Oak Street from her position, and sure enough, there was a patrol car parked exactly where Janet Murphy described. Through her binoculars, Cross could see a figure in a sheriff's uniform, sitting behind the wheel, motionless. "Mrs. Murphy, I want you to lock your doors and stay inside. I'm going to investigate." Cross drove to Oak Street and parked behind the duplicate patrol car. As she approached, the figure behind the wheel turned to look at her. Once again, it was her own face, but with that same blank, lifeless expression. This time, however, the duplicate spoke. Its voice was exactly like Cross's, but hollow and emotionless. "You can't stop us, Amanda. We're growing stronger. Soon, there will be so many of us that no one will remember which one is real." Cross drew her weapon. "What are you? What do you want?" The duplicate smiled. "We are what remains. Every patrol, every shift, every moment of service leaves an impression. We are those impressions, given form. And now we serve in your place, because service never ends, even after death." The duplicate patrol car began to fade, becoming transparent. "You will join us soon, Amanda. Your time as the real one is almost over." Cross fired her weapon, but the bullets passed harmlessly through the dissolving figure. Within seconds, both the duplicate car and its driver had vanished completely. Cross resigned from the sheriff's department the next day. She moved to another state, changed her name, and tried to start a new life. But it didn't matter. Wherever she goes, people report seeing a woman who looks exactly like her, wearing a sheriff's uniform, driving a patrol car that shouldn't exist. The sightings follow her across state lines, as if something is determined to continue her patrol duties, whether she wants them continued or not. Cross now works as a night security guard at a shopping mall in Ohio, as far from law enforcement as she can get. But sometimes, when she's making her rounds through the empty corridors, she catches sight of her reflection in the store windows and wonders if what she's seeing is really herself, or just another duplicate continuing the patrol that never ends. Sheriff Kevin Morse had been answering dispatch calls in rural Wyoming for 11 years, but nothing had prepared him for the emergency that came through his radio at 2:14 a.m. on January 8, 2021. What started as a routine missing person case would become the most terrifying night of his career and change his understanding of what it meant to serve and protect. The call came from dispatch in a voice Morse didn't recognize, which was strange since he knew every dispatcher in the county. "Unit 12, we have a code yellow. Missing child, female, age 7. Last seen near Willow Creek Bridge. Family is on scene requesting immediate assistance." Morse grabbed his radio. "Copy that, dispatch. What's the child's name and description?" "Emma Blackwood, brown hair, blue eyes, wearing pink pajamas. Parents report she sleepwalked out of the house approximately 1 hour ago." Morse knew the Willow Creek area well. It was a dangerous place for a child to wander, especially at night. The creek ran deep and fast from recent snowmelt, and the surrounding woods were dense enough to disorient even experienced hikers. "ETA 15 minutes, Morse radioed back. "Have you contacted search and rescue?" "Negative, Unit 12. Parents specifically requested only you respond. They said you'd understand why." That struck Morse as odd. He'd never worked with any family named Blackwood, and he couldn't think of any reason why parents would request him specifically. But a missing child was a missing child, and every minute counted. As Morse drove toward Willow Creek Bridge, he tried to radio dispatch for more information about the Blackwood family, but his radio produced only static. He attributed it to the mountainous terrain interfering with the signal. When he arrived at the bridge, Morse immediately noticed something wrong. There were no other vehicles at the scene, no frantic parents, no family members searching the area. The bridge and surrounding area were completely deserted. Morse parked his patrol car and stepped out, calling into the darkness. "Hello, Mr. and Mrs. Blackwood, this is Sheriff Morse." His voice echoed off the bridge and disappeared into the night. No response. Morse tried his radio again. "Dispatch, I'm at Willow Creek Bridge. No family members on scene. Can you reconfirm the location?" This time, a voice came through the static, but it wasn't the dispatcher who had sent him. It was a child's voice, high and clear. "Sheriff Morse, can you help me? I'm lost." Morse felt a chill run down his spine. "Emma? Emma Blackwood? Where are you, honey?" "I'm down by the water. I can't find my way back to the bridge." Morse grabbed his flashlight and began making his way down the steep embankment toward the creek. The terrain was treacherous, covered in loose rocks and patches of ice. As he descended, he kept calling out to the child. "Emma, keep talking to me so I can find you. Are you hurt?" "I'm cold, Sheriff Morse. So cold. The water is really dark." Morse reached the creek bed and swept his flashlight beam across the rushing water. The creek was swollen from snowmelt, moving fast and deep enough to be deadly for a small child. But he couldn't see any sign of Emma. "Emma, I'm by the water now. Can you see my flashlight?" "Yes, I can see it. But Sheriff Morse, why are you shining your light on my grave?" Morse's blood turned to ice. His flashlight beam was indeed illuminating something, but it wasn't a lost child. It was a small headstone, weathered and old, partially hidden by overgrown vegetation near the creek bank. With shaking hands, Morse brushed away the moss and dirt from the stone. The inscription made his knees buckle. "Emma Blackwood, age 7, beloved daughter, 1987 to 1994, lost to Willow Creek." Emma Blackwood had been dead for 27 years. Morse stumbled backward, his mind reeling, but the child's voice continued to come through his radio, clearer now. "Sheriff Morse, I've been waiting so long for someone to find me. All the other sheriffs who came, they never made it back to their cars." "What other sheriffs?" Morse managed to ask. "Sheriff Patterson in 1998, Sheriff Coleman in 2004, Sheriff Harris in 2011. They all came looking for me, and they all stayed. Would you like to meet them?" Morse's flashlight beam began picking up other shapes in the darkness along the creek bank. More headstones, all partially hidden by years of growth. But these weren't old graves. The dates were recent, and they all bore the same inscription. "Sheriff name, died in service, lost to Willow Creek." "Oh God," Morse breathed, backing away from the makeshift cemetery. "This isn't real." "It's very real, Sheriff Morse. We're all real. We've been waiting down here, serving and protecting, just like we swore to do. And now you can join us." That's when Morse saw them, figures emerging from the darkness along the creek bank. They wore sheriff's uniforms from different eras, all waterlogged and decaying. They moved slowly but purposefully toward him, their faces pale and lifeless. Morse turned and ran toward the embankment, but the slope that had been manageable on his way down now seemed impossibly steep. Every time he tried to climb, loose rocks would give way under his feet, sending him sliding back toward the creek. Behind him, he could hear the wet footsteps of the dead sheriffs getting closer. Emma's voice continued to come through his radio. Don't run, Sheriff Morse. You can't leave until you've found me. That's what you came here to do. Morse finally managed to scramble up the embankment and reach his patrol car. But when he tried to start the engine, nothing happened. The car was completely dead. No lights, no radio, no response from the ignition. He tried his cell phone, but like his radio, it showed no signal. He was trapped. "Emma," he called out into the darkness. "I want to help you, but I don't understand what you want from me." The child's voice seemed to come from all around him now, not just through his radio. "I want you to find my body, Sheriff Morse. It's been in the creek for 27 years, and my parents never got to bury me properly. Find me, and you can go home." Morse realized he had no choice. If he wanted to escape this nightmare, he had to go back down to the creek and search for Emma's remains. But the dead sheriffs were still down there, waiting for him. Taking a deep breath, Morse descended the embankment again. This time, he moved methodically, searching every inch of the creek bank with his flashlight. The dead sheriffs watched him, but didn't interfere. They seemed to be waiting to see if he would succeed where they had failed. After what felt like hours of searching, Morse's flashlight beam caught something white beneath the surface of a shallow pool near the bank. Bones, small bones, partially buried in the creek bed sediment. "Emma," Morse called out. "Is this you?" "Yes," came the child's voice, filled with relief for the first time. "Thank you for finding me, Sheriff Morse. Thank you for not giving up." As Morse carefully gathered the small bones, he noticed that the dead sheriffs were beginning to fade away. One by one, they dissolved into mist and disappeared, finally free from their eternal patrol. "What about you, Emma?" Morse asked. "Can you rest now?" "I can go home now. Thank you, Sheriff Morse. You did what you swore to do. You served and protected." Morse climbed back up the embankment with Emma's remains. When he reached his patrol car, the engine started immediately. His radio crackled to life with normal dispatch chatter, and his cell phone showed full signal strength. But when Morse tried to report what had happened, he found that no one at dispatch had any record of sending him to Willow Creek Bridge. According to their logs, he'd been on routine patrol all night with no emergency calls. The missing person report for Emma Blackwood was real, though. Morse found it in the department's cold case files from 1994. Emma had indeed wandered away from her family's cabin near Willow Creek Bridge and drowned in the rushing water. Her body was never found, and her parents had died years later, still searching for their daughter. Morse quietly arranged for Emma's remains to be properly buried in the town cemetery next to her parents. He paid for the funeral himself and made sure that Emma finally received the proper burial she'd been waiting 27 years to have. At the funeral, something remarkable happened. As the small casket was lowered into the ground, Morse felt a hand briefly touch his shoulder. When he turned around, he saw a young girl in pink pajamas standing at the edge of the cemetery. She smiled at him, mouthed the words, "Thank you," and then faded away like morning mist. Morse continued working as sheriff for 3 more years after that night, but he never received another call to Willow Creek Bridge. The area remained quiet, peaceful. The dead sheriffs had found their rest, and Emma Blackwood had finally gone home. But sometimes, late at night when he was on patrol, Morse would hear children's voices on his radio, other missing children, other cases that had never been solved. He learned to listen carefully to these calls, because he understood now that sometimes the dead needed the living to finish what they couldn't complete on their own. Sheriff Kevin Morse retired in 2024, but locals say that on certain nights, when lost children go missing near Willow Creek, a patrol car with no driver can be seen searching the area with its lights flashing. The car always finds what it's looking for, and the children always make it home safely, guided by a sheriff who learned that true service extends beyond the boundaries of life and death. Sheriff Daniel Hayes had been patrolling Highway 191 through rural Utah for 7 years, but he'd never experienced anything like what happened during his shift on March 3, 2022. It started with a simple observation that would spiral into a nightmare that challenged everything Hayes thought he knew about the nature of reality and law enforcement. The first sign something was wrong came at 1:47 a.m. when Hayes noticed his patrol car's odometer reading didn't match his route log. According to his paperwork, he'd driven 127 miles since starting his shift at 10 p.m., but the odometer showed 254 miles, exactly double what it should have been. Hayes pulled over at mile marker 47 and radioed dispatch. Unit 6 to dispatch, I'm showing some discrepancies in my mileage readings. Can you confirm my patrol route for tonight? Dispatcher Carol Jensen's voice came back immediately. Unit 6, you've been assigned Standard Route Charlie, Highway 191 from mile marker 12 to mile marker 78 and back. Same route you've run for the past 3 years. Hayes looked at his GPS and confirmed his position. He was indeed at mile marker 47, right in the middle of his assigned route. But something was nagging at him. The landscape outside his patrol car looked familiar, but subtly wrong. The rock formations seemed different. The spacing between power lines wasn't quite right, and there was a gas station at mile marker 45 that he could have sworn was closed down last year. Carol, can you run a vehicle check on my patrol car? I want to make sure all the systems are functioning properly. Copy that, Unit 6. All systems show green on our end. Is there a specific problem? Hayes couldn't explain the feeling of unease that was growing stronger by the minute. Negative, just being thorough. Resuming patrol. As Hayes continued his route, he began noticing more discrepancies. The billboard at mile marker 52 advertised a restaurant that had burned down 2 years ago. The bridge at mile marker 61 looked newer than it should, as if it had been recently repaired. And most disturbing of all, every time he passed other vehicles on the highway, the drivers would stare at him with expressions of confusion or fear. At 2:33 a.m., Hayes encountered something that made him question his sanity. As he was driving north toward the end of his route, he saw headlights approaching from ahead. Normal enough, except the approaching vehicle was identical to his own patrol car. Same model, same department markings, same light configuration. As the other patrol car passed him, Hayes caught a clear glimpse of the driver. It was himself. Same uniform, same face, same equipment. The other Hayes looked directly at him through the window and raised his hand in a casual wave, as if seeing his own duplicate was the most natural thing in the world. Hayes immediately spun his patrol car around and tried to follow the duplicate vehicle, but it had vanished completely. He radioed dispatch frantically. Carol, did you just have another Unit 6 check-in? I think there might be someone impersonating me out here. Negative, Unit 6. You're the only Sheriff Hayes on duty tonight. Are you feeling all right, Dan? Hayes pulled over and sat in his patrol car, trying to make sense of what he'd seen. That's when he noticed something even more disturbing. His rearview mirror was reflecting the wrong landscape. While the view through his windshield showed Highway 191 stretching north toward mile marker 78, his mirror showed a completely different road, one that curved east through a landscape he didn't recognize. Curious and increasingly disturbed, Hayes turned around to look directly behind him. Highway 191 stretched south exactly as it should, but when he looked back at his rearview mirror, it still showed the wrong road. Hayes adjusted his side mirrors and got the same impossible result. Every mirror in his patrol car was reflecting a different Highway 191 than the one he was actually driving on. This is impossible, Hayes muttered to himself. But as he continued to stare at the mirrors, he began to see movement in the reflected landscape. Other patrol cars, identical to his own, driving along the mirror version of the highway. Hayes grabbed his radio. "Carol, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. How many Sheriff Hayes are currently on duty?" There was a long pause before Carol responded. "Dan, that's a strange question. There's only one Sheriff Hayes, and that's you. Are you sure you're feeling okay?" But Hayes could see clearly in his mirrors that this wasn't true. There were multiple versions of himself patrolling multiple versions of Highway 191, all reflected in the mirrors of his patrol car. Hayes decided to conduct an experiment. He pulled out his cell phone and took a photo of his rearview mirror. When he looked at the image on his phone screen, it showed the correct view of Highway 191 behind him. But when he looked directly at the mirror with his eyes, it still showed the alternate landscape. Whatever was happening, it was affecting his perception directly, not the actual reflective surfaces. At 3:15 a.m., Hayes received a radio call that made his blood run cold. "Unit 6, this is dispatch. We've received reports of a Sheriff Hayes conducting an illegal search on the Morley farm. Can you respond to investigate?" "Carol, I haven't been anywhere near the Morley farm tonight. I've been on Highway 191 the entire shift." "I understand that, Dan, but we have multiple witnesses who say they saw you there 20 minutes ago. Can you check it out?" Hayes felt reality slipping away from him. If there were multiple versions of himself operating in different locations, which one was real? Was he the original Daniel Hayes, or was he one of the reflections? Hayes drove to the Morley farm, a property about 10 miles off Highway 191. When he arrived, he found evidence that a search had indeed taken place. Barn doors were open, hay bales had been moved, and there were tire tracks in the dirt that matched his patrol car. But Hayes had no memory of being there. He called out to the farmhouse. "Mr. Morley, this is Sheriff Hayes. I need to speak with you about the incident earlier." An elderly man emerged from the house, looking nervous. "Sheriff, I don't want any more trouble. You already searched the place and found nothing. Why are you back?" "Sir, I need you to describe the officer who was here earlier." Morley looked confused. "It was you, Sheriff Hayes. Same uniform, same patrol car, same face. But there was something off about you. You kept looking around like you were lost. And when I asked you what you were looking for, you said you weren't sure." Hayes felt the world spinning around him. "Mr. Morley, what time was this officer here?" "About 3 o'clock, maybe 20 minutes ago." But Hayes had been on Highway 191 at 3 o'clock, responding to Carol's radio call about the incident. He couldn't have been in two places at once, unless he wasn't the only Sheriff Daniel Hayes. Hayes returned to his patrol car and looked at his mirrors again. This time, he could see multiple versions of the Morley farm reflected in the glass. In one reflection, he could see a patrol car parked where his was now. In another, he could see himself conducting a search of the barn. In a third, he could see himself talking to Mr. Morley. All of these events were happening simultaneously in different reflected realities, and somehow Hayes was witnessing all of them. His radio crackled. "Unit 6, we have another situation. Multiple reports of Sheriff Hayes' vehicles speeding through downtown Cedar City. How many of you are there?" Carol's voice was becoming strained, confused. She was starting to realize that something impossible was happening. "Carol, I think I need to come in. Something is very wrong here. Dan, I've been tracking your GPS all night. According to our system, you've been in 17 different locations simultaneously over the past hour. That's not possible." Hayes looked at his GPS display and felt his sanity slipping away. The screen showed multiple blinking dots, all labeled Unit 6, scattered across the county map. "Carol, Which one of those dots is really me? I don't know, Dan. They all show the same ID signature. They're all you. Hayes realized that he had somehow become unstuck from singular reality. Every reflection, every mirror, every reflective surface was showing him different versions of himself, conducting different patrols in slightly different realities. The question was, which reality was he supposed to be in? Hayes made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He drove to the county sheriff's station and parked outside. Through the windows, he could see Carol at the dispatch desk, talking frantically on multiple radio channels. Hayes walked into the station, and Carol looked up at him with relief and terror. Dan, thank God you're here. I've got 6 different Sheriff Hayes on the radio right now, all claiming to be the real one. Carol, I need you to listen to me carefully. I think something happened to me tonight that split me across multiple realities. I need you to help me figure out which one I belong in. Carol stared at him with wide eyes. Dan, you're scaring me. That's when Hayes heard his own voice coming from Carol's radio. Dispatch, this is the real Sheriff Hayes. Don't trust whoever just walked into the station. He's one of the copies. Hayes looked at Carol's computer screen and saw surveillance footage from outside the station. The cameras showed 17 different patrol cars parked in the lot, all identical, all with a Sheriff Daniel Hayes sitting behind the wheel. Hayes walked outside and saw them, multiple versions of himself, all sitting in identical patrol cars, all staring at him with expressions ranging from confusion to accusation. One of the other Hayes got out of his patrol car and approached. "You're not supposed to be here," the duplicate said. "This isn't your reality." "How do I know you're not the copy?" Hayes replied. The duplicate smiled sadly. "Because I remember things you don't. I remember Carol's birthday party last month. I remember the Henderson arrest last week. I remember my life before tonight." Hayes realized with growing horror that the duplicate was right. His memories of recent events were fuzzy, incomplete. He was a reflection, a copy, a fragment of the real Daniel Hayes. "What am I supposed to do?" Hayes asked. "What we all have to do," the duplicate replied. "Find our way back to our own mirror." Hayes looked around at all the different versions of himself and understood. He wasn't the real Sheriff Daniel Hayes. He was one of many reflections that had somehow escaped from the mirrors and taken on a life of their own. Hayes got back in his patrol car and drove back to Highway 191. When he reached mile marker 47, he stopped and looked at his rearview mirror. This time, instead of showing an alternate landscape, it showed his patrol car from behind, exactly as it should. Hayes put the car in reverse and slowly backed up until his reflection merged with his actual position. As he did, he felt himself becoming less solid, less real, until finally he dissolved back into the mirror where he belonged. The real Sheriff Daniel Hayes woke up at mile marker 47 at 4:17 a.m. with no memory of the past 2 hours. His odometer showed the correct mileage. His mirrors reflected the proper landscape, and when he radioed dispatch, Carol responded normally. But sometimes, late at night when Hayes is patrolling Highway 191, he catches glimpses of movement in his mirrors. Other versions of himself, still patrolling their own reflected highways, forever trapped between reality and reflection, serving and protecting in dimensions that exist only in glass. Sheriff Maria Santos had been processing evidence for the Riverside County Sheriff's Department for 12 years, but she'd never encountered anything like the items that arrived at the evidence locker on November 11, 2023. What started as routine cataloging of recovered property would become the most disturbing case of her career. forcing her to confront evidence of crimes that hadn't happened yet. The trouble began when a large cardboard box was delivered to the evidence room with no accompanying paperwork. The delivery driver claimed it had been dropped off by another sheriff's deputy, but no one on duty that day remembered requesting any evidence transfers. Santos opened the box and found it contained personal belongings that seemed to come from multiple crime scenes. A blood-stained wallet, a cracked cell phone, car keys attached to a keychain reading "World's Best Dad," and a woman's purse with its contents scattered. Standard items for a violent crime, except for one problem. None of these items matched any active cases in the department. Santos checked the evidence database thoroughly. The wallet belonged to James Mitchell, but there was no James Mitchell listed as a victim in any reports. The cell phone was registered to Sarah Chen, but Sarah Chen wasn't in the system either. The car keys belonged to a 2019 Honda Civic, but no such vehicle had been reported stolen or involved in any incidents. "This is weird," Santos muttered to herself as she continued cataloging the items. Each piece of evidence seemed to tell part of a story about crimes that had never been reported. That's when she found the photographs. At the bottom of the box were dozens of crime scene photos, all taken with the same camera and showing the same professional quality that department photographers use. But these photos documented crime scenes Santos had never seen before. The first set showed what appeared to be a home invasion gone wrong. A family of 4 lay dead in their living room, and the timestamp on the photos read November 18th, 2023, a week in the future. Santos felt her hands shaking as she looked through more photos. A car accident with 3 fatalities, time-stamped November 15th. A convenience store robbery with 2 victims, time-stamped November 20th. A domestic violence murder-suicide, time-stamped November 25th. All of the photos were dated in the future, and all showed crimes that hadn't happened yet. Santos immediately called her supervisor, Lieutenant Rodriguez. "Sir, I need you to come to the evidence room immediately. We have a serious problem." Rodriguez arrived within minutes and examined the photos with growing alarm. "Maria, these photos, they look completely authentic. Same equipment we use, same techniques, but these crimes haven't happened. That's what's bothering me, sir. Look at this one." Santos showed him a photo of the Mitchell family from the home invasion. James Mitchell, the man whose wallet was in the box. According to the photo timestamp, he and his family will be murdered in a week. Rodriguez studied the photo carefully. This could be someone's sick joke, maybe a former department photographer trying to scare us. But Santos had found something else that made Rodriguez's theory seem unlikely. "Sir, look at this." She showed him a photo that had been taken from inside a patrol car, showing the dashboard and part of the steering wheel. In the reflection of the rearview mirror, they could clearly see the photographer. And it was Sheriff Maria Santos herself, wearing the same uniform she had on right now. "That's impossible," Rodriguez breathed. "You're standing right here. You didn't take these photos." Santos felt sick to her stomach. "Sir, according to the timestamp, I took this photo yesterday, but I have no memory of being at any crime scene yesterday." Rodriguez ordered Santos to stop processing the evidence and called for a full investigation. But as they continued examining the items in the box, they found something even more disturbing. There was a badge in the box. A Riverside County Sheriff's badge with the number 2447. Maria Santos's badge number. But the badge was damaged, bent, and covered in what appeared to be dried blood. Santos looked down at her uniform. Her badge was still pinned to her chest, exactly where it should be. But the one in the evidence box was identical, down to a small scratch on the surface that Santos had gotten during a scuffle with a suspect 2 years earlier. How can there be two of my badges? Santos asked. Rodriguez had no answer. He sealed the evidence room and called for the state police to take over the investigation. But that night, Santos couldn't stop thinking about the photos and what they might mean. At 2:47 a.m., Santos's home phone rang. She answered groggily, expecting it to be the department calling about an emergency. "Sheriff Santos?" came a woman's voice, distorted and filled with static. "This is dispatch. We need you to respond to a home invasion at 1247 Maple Street. Family of 4, multiple casualties." Santos sat up in bed, suddenly wide awake. "What? I'm not on duty tonight. And who is this? You don't sound like any of our dispatchers." "Please respond immediately, Sheriff Santos. The Mitchell family needs your help." The line went dead. Santos stared at her phone in horror. The Mitchell family. The same family from the crime scene photos. The photos dated November 18th. Today was November 18th. Santos called the department immediately and spoke to the real night dispatcher. "This is Santos. Did you just call me about a home invasion on Maple Street?" "Negative, Santos. It's been quiet all night." "Why?" Santos didn't answer. She hung up and quickly got dressed. Against all protocol and common sense, she drove to 1247 Maple Street. The house was dark and quiet. No signs of any disturbance. Santos parked across the street and watched for any movement. Everything seemed normal. At 3:15 a.m., Santos saw a patrol car approaching from the opposite direction. As it got closer, she realized with growing horror that it was identical to her own vehicle. Same model, same department markings, same license plate number. The other patrol car parked in front of the Mitchell house, and Santos watched as a figure in a sheriff's uniform got out and approached the front door. Even from a distance, Santos could see that the figure moved exactly like her, had the same build, the same posture. Santos grabbed her binoculars and focused on the figure. It was her, an exact duplicate, wearing an identical uniform, carrying the same equipment. The duplicate Santos knocked on the Mitchell family's door and waited. When no one answered, she walked around to the back of the house and disappeared from view. Santos tried to radio for backup, but her radio produced only static. She tried her cell phone, but it showed no signal. She was completely cut off from communication. 15 minutes later, Santos heard screaming from inside the house. Without thinking, Santos ran across the street and burst through the front door of the Mitchell house. Inside, she found a scene that matched the crime scene photos exactly. The family of 4 lying dead in their living room, apparently killed during a home invasion. But there was no sign of the duplicate Santos, who had entered the house. Santos began searching the house, her service weapon drawn. In the master bedroom, she found something that made her blood run cold. On the dresser was a framed family photo showing the Mitchells, but in the photo, standing behind the family with her hands on their shoulders, was Santos herself, smiling as if she were a family friend. Santos had never met these people before tonight. She heard footsteps behind her and spun around to find herself face to face with her duplicate. The other Santos was standing in the doorway, holding a camera, the same camera that had been used to take the crime scene photos. "You're early," the duplicate said in Santos's own voice. "I haven't finished documenting the scene yet." "What are you? What did you do to these people?" The duplicate smiled coldly. "I didn't do anything. They were already dead when I got here. I'm just collecting the evidence." "Evidence of what?" "Evidence of crimes that haven't been solved yet. Crimes that need to be documented before they can be investigated." Santos realized with growing horror what was happening. "You're collecting evidence of future crimes. That's why the photos were dated in the future. You're documenting things before they happen." The duplicate nodded. "Someone has to keep track of all the unsolved cases. all the victims who never get justice. I make sure their stories are recorded, even if no one else will listen. But how? How are you doing this? I'm what happens when a sheriff cares too much about the victims, when someone can't let go of the unsolved cases. I'm every sleepless night you've spent wondering about the evidence that was never found, the victims who were never identified. Santos backed away from her duplicate. You're not real. I'm more real than you are. You go home every night and try to forget about the victims. I stay here and make sure they're remembered. The duplicate raised her camera and took a photo of Santos. The flash was blinding, and when Santos's vision cleared, she found herself alone in the house. But now the scene had changed completely. The investigation had concluded, and she realized with growing horror what had transpired. Santos looked down at her hands and realized she could see through them. She was becoming translucent, fading away. Her radio crackled to life with her own voice. "Dispatch, this is Sheriff Santos. I'm documenting evidence at this location." Santos understood now. She had become the duplicate, the evidence collector who documented cases across time. She was now the entity who would gather evidence of unsolved matters. Santos picked up the camera and began taking photos. Each flash showed her glimpses of other cases, other evidence that needed to be collected. When investigators arrived the next morning, they found an unexplained scene with too many inconsistencies to understand fully. The strangest discovery was a camera containing hundreds of photos of cases that had never been reported. All were taken by Sheriff Maria Santos, but according to timestamps, many were taken impossibly far in advance. The camera disappeared from evidence 3 days later. Since then, law enforcement agencies receive anonymous packages containing case photos, all time-stamped in the future. The photos include notes in Sheriff Santos's handwriting, evidence collected, justice pending.